speakers. Is this? No, it's lit up. I wasn't sure. Okay. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the January 25th Zoning Board of Adjustments meeting. Our next meeting will be February 22nd, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. in the Matthew Thornton room. Before we get started today, Chuck, would you be able to sit in for Lynn today? All right, thank you. And if everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and Rodney, if you could please read in the preamble.
Good evening to those in attendance and watching at home. For the benefit of those who have not previously attended a zoning board hearing, the procedure is as follows. The petitions will be heard in the order they appear on the agenda. However, the chair may change the order at their discretion. The board will treat all petitioners, their representatives, abutters, and other interested parties fairly and with respect. The petitioner will be asked to give an overview of their petition and read through their responses to the criteria applicable to their case, allowing for the board to ask questions after each item. State law and local ordinances establish the criteria that must be met in order for the board to grant approval to a petition, and it is the petitioner's responsibility to demonstrate that they have met all and each of the criterion. Following the presentation, the chair will open the floor for public comment, either in favor or opposed to the request. If necessary, an opportunity for a rebuttal will be offered to the petitioner and public. However, discussion will not be allowed to devolve into back and forth arguments. All comments made shall be directed toward the chair. Should a question be asked, the chair will pose the question to the petitioner. Afterward, the chair will close the public hearing and the board will deliberate and vote on the petition. At this time, please silence all mobile devices. Thank you.
All right, and anyone who's looking to speak tonight, if you could please just raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, thank you. One change that we are looking to make tonight is to take item number 10 for Mark Rivet, petitioner, and Fraser Square Realty LLC as item number 3 after the Catherine Turbot and Clinton Howell petitioner owners item, since we are probably going to have a lot of discussion on the subsequent petitions. So getting started, the first petition we're looking to hear is Catherine Turbot and Clinton Howell, petitioners owners, variance under section 3.02.4 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing leach field to remain 13 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required. Parcels located at 19 Whitetail Ridge in the R1 residential by map district, tax map 4A, lot 23-09, case ZBA 2023-07. Good evening.
Good evening.
If I could just please have you state your names into the microphone.
I'm Clinton Howell.
Okay.
And Catherine Turbot.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if you could please tell us a little bit about this petition, and then if we could just stop at the end of each point of the reading through the bullets for the application that you handed in.
Okay. So the overview, we built a house up on Whitetail Ridge, 19 Whitetail Ridge. The property is referenced here, and we have a leach field that was constructed approximately 13 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required. So we're seeking a variance for that leach field for the septic system. You want me to continue with item number 1?
I guess my only question was, how long ago was the leach field put in?
That would have been constructed approximately around October 2021 timeframe.
Okay. And I guess
That's an approximation, so sorry.
How did you find out that you weren't in that you needed a variance?
We
I'll take that one. So this came up when they tried to obtain a certificate of occupancy. The builder that they had put in the leach field ahead of time, and tried to do everything along the construction path. And it was discovered when we had the plot plan turned in, like I said. So this is an issue that came up because, as I discovered through this process, when they came to us for our signature on the CO, we found out that there is no local review for septic plans in Merrimack, apparently. What the building department does is they rely on the state to review the plans, and if they get approved, they'll construct it. However, Merrimack has a local, more restrictive septic setback than what the state has. The state is, I think, 10 feet. The town's is 20 feet. So the state doesn't care about what the town's is. They're focused on theirs. The town, we are focused on ours. And it ended up slipping through.
So this type of thing is unavoidable?
I don't think it's unavoidable. I think if there were local review of septic plans, then it would have been caught at that time. It's just apparently that does not happen here.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, if you want to just go through each bullet and stop at the end of the paragraph so that we can ask any questions that we might have.
Sorry for the long-winded responses here, so I'll try my best here. Granting the variance would not be contrary to public interest because the existing leach field location at 19 Whitetail Ridge abuts the 17 Whitetail Ridges leach field, which is on a level part of 17 Whitetail Ridges lot and 30 feet down from a man-made retaining wall from the abutter's yard at 17 and further from their well and primary dwelling. This placement places both leach fields a substantial distance from 17 Whitetail Ridge's building structure, existing well, and usable yard. Additionally, based on the location of 19 Whitetail Ridge leach field and 17 Whitetail Ridge's leach field, it is unlikely that a well will be placed in proximity to either leach field. It is also noted, we had submitted an attached letter with this variance application, but it is also noted that the neighbor residing at 17 Whitetail Ridge is in support of the variance and will not impact their interest in the land. They had submitted a signed document for reference for what that's worth. Lastly, the existing leach field location of 19 Whitetail Ridge sits on a level part of the lot and 30 feet above a man-made retaining wall, where the remainder of 19 Whitetail Ridge's property extends behind another approximate 1 acre past our leach field on the back end. There was attached photos kind of showing that as well submitted. The request for this variance should not be contrary to the public interest because it will not be harmful to the public health, safety, or welfare of personnel. The location of the leach field does not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or be viewable by any neighbors or people in the neighborhood. The state inspected and approved the placement of the septic system, including the leach field. The location promotes public interest by maximizing the space of land cleared for the home on the front third of the lot and avoiding the public easement side of the lot, which is on the opposite side of the leach field, and allowing for the back 2/3 to maintain the wooded area and neighborhood trail access to Greater Woods Conservation Area, which we allow our neighbors to access to get to the Greater Woods Conservation Area. While the town of Merrimack requires a 20-foot setback for the leach field, the state of New Hampshire only requires a 10-foot setback. As installed, the septic system meets all state requirements.
All right. Thank you. Any questions from the board? All right. Please continue. Oh, sorry.
I assume they had a proper building permit from the town of Merrimack.
That is correct from our knowledge.
From our knowledge, staff's knowledge, the building department did issue permits. Yes.
And so the contractor was familiar with and had knowledge of what the requirements of the town of Merrimack were.
Not necessarily so, because again, there was no local review of any septic done, so they went under the operational approval, or excuse me, the approval for installation, approval for, I forget how they call it, construction, approval for construction that the state issues based on their setbacks.
But the town of Merrimack issued a permit to a construction company.
For the dwelling, yes.
for the ability to operate in the town of Merrimack under that building permit.
I'm confused, Chuck. What is your question?
The question is, why did the contractor not follow the requirements of the town of Merrimack under a building permit?
And that's what Robert was explaining
Again,
earlier.
Well, that's what he's attempting to explain, but he hasn't yet fulfilled that obligation.
I cannot speak for the building department. They are not a part of the community development department. I do not know why they did not do a local review of a septic system, why they did not try to figure out why the 20-foot setback was not adhered to.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Please continue.
The spirit of the ordinance is observed because the existing leach field location of this is pretty much the same thing. So if you want me to repeat, I'll keep going. But if you want me to stop.
So,
let me know.
the process that we have is you have to read in each section
Okay.
so it's a statement into the record.
Understandable. The existing leach field location of 19 Whitetail Ridge abuts 17 Whitetail Ridges leach field, which is on a level part of 17 Whitetail Ridges lot and 30 feet down a man-made retaining wall. This placement places both leach fields a substantial distance from that 17 Whitetail Ridges building structure, existing well, and usable yard. Additionally, based on the location of 19 Whitetail Ridges leach field and 17 Whitetail Ridges leach field, it is unlikely that any structure will be placed in proximity to either leach field. Lastly, the existing leach field location of 19 Whitetail Ridge sits on a level part of the lot and 30 feet above a man-made retaining wall, where the remainder of 19 Whitetail Ridge's property extends behind another approximate 1 acre. The request for this variance should not be contrary to public interest because it will not be harmful to the public health, safety, or welfare. The location of the leach field will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or be visible to any neighbors or people. The state approved the placement of the septic system, including the leach field. The location promotes public interest by maximizing the space of land cleared for the home on the front third of the lot and avoiding the public easement side of the lot on the opposite side, and allowing for the 2/3 of the lot to maintain woods, the back 2/3 of the lot to maintain woods and neighborhood trail access to Greater Woods Conservation Area. While the town of Merrimack requires a 20-foot setback for the leach field, the state of New Hampshire only requires a 10-foot setback. As installed, this septic system meets all state requirements.
Any questions from the board? All right, Chuck.
I'd like to know who designed the septic system and submitted the septic system.
Do we have that?
No idea.
All right.
As far as I know, I believe it was I think it was Fieldstone that did the septic design. I don't know who the installer was.
Any further questions? All right, please continue.
Granting the variance would do substantial justice because, in our response, granting the variance would do substantial justice as the existing leach field location of 19 Whitetail Ridge does not do harm to the general public. To further support substantial justice, the existing leach field 19 Whitetail Ridge abuts the leach field of 17 Whitetail Ridge, which already renders that part of 17 Whitetail Ridge unfit for the placement of a structure or well for either property. Additionally, the variance allows the leach field to stay at the front third of the lot opposite of the public easement and reduces the impact to the remaining woods and neighborhood trail access to the Greater Woods Conservation Area at the back 2/3 of the lot. To deny the request for a variance would be a substantial injustice with no real gain to the public. To grant this variance would take advantage of property that is already unfit for anything else based on the placement of both leach fields and maintain the integrity of the woods surrounding them and the public easement side of the lot on the opposite side. In addition, the property was developed by a builder that is now bankrupt and no longer in business. The owners of 19 Whitetail Ridge are left to finish multiple issues left behind by detailed design builders And due to the design of the property, moving the leach field will require significant redesign that could alter the character of the neighborhood.
So the builder that built this property went bankrupt?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
I'd like to know what the alternative designs were and what the cost represented by taking one of those options.
I'm not sure that any of us would have that information.
Well, I think it's necessary information for us to consider relative to the question that is before us. There are reasonable options that are available to the petitioner. Thank you. If there are reasonable options available to the petitioner, other than looking for the easiest way to resolve this for themselves, we need to know what those are, because our zoning is paramount.
I would agree, and I would say that if this were not built yet, that would be a valid question. Unfortunately, that's not one of the parameters we're looking at. It's already in place. So the question is, if this is denied, the cost of relocating that, does that outweigh any public gain to the actual relocation? So that's the question we have to ask ourselves here.
Well, I think the question is larger than that, actually. What is the damage to the public? The petitioner has suggested that there isn't any, and yet there is indeed, because the construction industry is replete with these kinds of examples where somebody does something, and then the town has to pick up the bad results in some way. That's just not the proper processorial way of going about building, developing, and issuing permits.
Well, in fairness, I think this should have been looked at the time the permit was issued, and unfortunately, that's not a process we can correct in this meeting.
Well, I think it is a process that we can make recommendations to correct. If in fact there was some failure, which is suggested on the part of the town of Merrimack, that they didn't review the plan and failed in some way, that's a significant accusation. And I don't think that the circumstances as I view them bear merit in that regard.
Okay. I think that's worth bringing up at the end of our meeting, actually, because that is something I do want to take a look at. But in terms of this particular petition that's in front of us, I'm not so sure that that's relevant. So what I'm going to suggest we do is continue with this and then have the discussion about our process after we've heard all the petitions. Because in this particular petition, we're determining whether or not there is a correlation between the cost of removing this leach field that's already in place, which is now on the owners, not on the builder. So builder takes no responsibility in this point in time. So is there a benefit to the public for the current owners to remove their leach field? That's what we have to really weigh in here.
Well, we can't determine that until we've been given what the options for an alternative septic system were and what the costs were for that. There's no other way that we can appreciate what that balance that you wish to strike is without knowing what Y is after X.
I don't agree with that, because at this point in time, it's not relevant. Because we can't sit here and suggest to an owner to relocate their leach field because of a variance that was missed on the builder's part. That's not their fault.
Plus the fact that we issue a building permit. Plus the fact that we issue a building permit without having the leach field plans or requiring it.
Bingo.
So we're partly at fault.
Exactly.
Our system has a flaw in it, and that's something, as you said, we'll discuss at the end of our meeting, and it's something the town can correct going forward.
Correct.
That may or may not be the case. We do not know what the facts of this situation truly are. They have been represented anecdotally without evidence.
Okay. Well, at this point in time, I'm going to continue along with the petition and continue to hear it out. And then we can have these discussions, like I said, towards the end, or when we're, going through a motion. So I apologize for the going back and forth. If you could please continue.
Granting the variance would not diminish the values of the surrounding properties because, and then our response, granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties as this property is in a residential area. The existing leach field is consistent with the existing character of the neighborhood, maintaining the homes and the surrounding house-related items, for example, the septic, the well, within close proximity to the homes to maintain the wood structure around all of the homes. The design, location, and construction consider the unique downslope characteristics of the property while being cognizant and sensitive to the primary abutting property. In addition, the placement of the leach field on 19 Whitetail Ridge again abuts the leach field of 17 Whitetail Ridge, taking advantage of parts of the properties that are already unfit for other uses and maximizing other parts of both properties for other uses.
Any questions from the board on item 4? All right, please continue to the unnecessary hardship.
Owing to the following special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, explain how the property cannot be reasonably used in strict conformance with the ordinance, and variance is therefore necessary to enable a reasonable use of the property. The significant downslope of the property of 19 Whitetail Ridge required that the property be built up using fill material to construct a single-family residence. The leach field location was determined by one of the few level portions of the property which would satisfy the requirements of the septic system. The original septic design had the leach field placed outside of the 20-foot setback. However, upon construction of the leach field, due to property characteristics, it was moved slightly closer to the property boundary. This placed it within the town of Merrimack's 20-foot setback. The septic system as constructed was inspected and approved for use by the state of New Hampshire. Reasonable use of this leach field location is justified by the location of the abutters leach field at 17 Whitetail Ridge, which is on the opposite side of the property line, rendering both properties' use of that location unfit for anything other than leach fields. With the existing structures and retaining walls in place, there are no other places on the property of 19 Whitetail Ridge to place the leach field without altering the character of the neighborhood.
All right, thank you. I know this is kind of a frustration as a homeowner to realize, oh, wait a minute, they built this not in the setback, but a lot of that I think falls on us for issuing the permit without reviewing that. So, I guess with that being said, are there any questions from the board regarding this petition? Rodney?
A very generic question. Do you have, in I guess, response to one of Chuck's questions, do you have a generic sense of what it would cost to relocate that? Have you got any quotes or has?
No, we have not received any quotes
Okay.
for that.
All right, thank you.
I could tell you it would be very expensive.
Well, that's my thought too, but I mean, in fairness to Chuck's question, if we had a ballpark figure, we'd toss something out there.
I think last leach field I replaced was about 10 years ago, and it was 15,000 at that point in time. So, I honestly, it's astronomical. All right. So at this point in time, what we normally do is open this to the public. So, is there anyone in the public that is looking to speak in favor of this petition? Oh, I apologize, Robert.
No, that's along those lines, actually. The petitioner did allude to a letter that was submitted. I noticed that letter. I don't see it in your packet. You do have it?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be the letter of support.
Okay. So since I've already opened it up to the public, I'll read this before I close that. Is there anyone here looking to speak in favor of this petition? All right. So with that being said, we did receive a letter from a Kayla Howe from 17 Whitetail Ridge, and the letter was, "It has come to our attention that our neighbors, Catherine Turbot and Clinton Howell, owners of 19 Whitetail Ridge, Merrimack, New Hampshire have submitted a variance request for their leach field that is 13 feet from the property line of 17 Whitetail Ridge. The distance is within the town required setback of limit of 20 or greater feet. Please accept this letter as agreement and support of the town's consideration for the current leach field location, as it sits across from our leach field and is down a sloped retaining wall from our usable yard space. So it's great that your neighbors are in support. And is there anyone that may be looking to speak against this petition? All right, I'll go ahead and close the public and entertain a motion or hear further discussion from the board. Go for it, Chuck.
I can appreciate the situation that has arisen for the applicant. I spent a number of years in the construction industry. I know how easily these things can happen. And they fall on the responsibility of the contractor and the homeowner, not the town of Merrimack. We may well be looking to ease some of this situation for them. But it is not our responsibility every time there is a sideline setback problem, simply because of costs and inconvenience associated with it,
That's correct.
issuing an affirmative easement. We have many, many petitioners in the town of Merrimack who have built a shed or a pool or whatever too close to the sidelines. And this is something that we cannot allow to foster into something greater. There must be some action taken by the part of the town to protect its interests, or we will have even more contractors, particularly, I know what contractors are like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is not our responsibility. This is a cruel business world, and I'm afraid their contractor has gone bankrupt, apparently. But that doesn't increase the responsibility of the town to give somebody an easement so that they don't suffer a larger cost from a mistake that they made in hiring a contractor or executing a contract on a private parcel. Our obligation is only to follow the ordinances and follow the permitting rules of the town of Merrimack.
Go for it.
I'd like to make a motion,
Okay.
if everyone, unless anyone else has.
If I could
anything
just
else they
make a
wanna add.
comment before a motion.
Sure.
Sure.
To some degree, I agree with you, Chuck. It's, to me, it's unfair for the homeowners to take this burden on. And I think the contractor, possibly, I don't want to accuse, it's always easier to ask forgiveness than permission. And I hope at the end of this meeting, we can have a discussion to try to avoid this from being a regular incident, especially on new constructions. Some schmo building a shed is totally innocent. I think what I'd like to look at and is what effect does allowing this have on the town? In my opinion, they've met all the criteria. And again, I'm still upset with the ask forgiveness rather than permission part of it. But I see no harm to the town and the criteria that he's spoken about to accept this. Thank you.
I think we should really table any further discussion about the situation that led up to this and focus explicitly on the petition itself, which is us determining the balance of what is the gain to the public for relocating this versus what is the gain to the owner for not relocating it. And in my eyes, the public gains nothing from us relocating a leach field other than saying we were able to throw the hammer down and strictly enforce an ordinance, which is not what we're here to do. So I would like to hear the motion.
I'd like to make a motion that the board finds the petitioner's responses to the statutory criteria sufficient, proved each criteria is met, and the board adopts the petitioner's responses as the board's findings of fact, and further to grant the variance under section 3.02.4 of the zoning ordinance to permit the existing leach field to remain 13 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required.
All right. Motion made by Patrick, seconded by Rodney. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Point
Oh,
of
sorry,
order,
Chuck?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You didn't allow for discussion of the motion.
I apologize. Let's discuss the motion.
I don't believe that the motion does, in fact, represent an acceptance of the criteria as described by the applicant.
I would then request that you vote that direction. I believe, however, that it does. So I'm going to vote in favor. I would ask that you vote in opposition if that's how you feel.
Well, I would expect that that would be a tacit arrangement on any Democratic committee.
So, all in favor? All opposed? 410 with Chuck in the opposition. So, just so you know, there is a 30-day window where somebody could appeal this decision, but otherwise, the variance does move forward. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
All right, the next petition, Mark Rivet petitioner and Fraser Square Realty LLC, owner, variance under section 2.02.13F of the zoning ordinance to permit a density of 6 multifamily residential units in the town center overlay district on a 19,140 square foot parcel, whereas 1 unit per 40,000 square feet is allowed. The parcel is located at 2 Railroad Avenue in the C2 General Commercial, I-1 Industrial, Aquifer Conservation, Elderly Housing Overlay, and Town Center Overlay Districts. Tax map 5D-4, lot 79, case ZBA 2023-08.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Chris Gaida with Fieldstone Land Consultants, working with Mark Rivet on this variance request tonight. First, I'd like to thank you for moving us up a little bit in the agenda. It's much appreciated.
Absolutely.
So- So if the, mostly folks are familiar with the location of this parcel is right next to the Rivet Funeral or Crematorium Funeral Home. And it's outlined in blue for the boundary line, and the existing buildings are in purple. I'll go through the overview here, but essentially the proposal is to repurpose the existing buildings, which are a mix of commercial and residential uses right now, which is allowed in the district, and to switch it primarily to residential entirely, which seems to be the need and the demand in the town and the state and the country right now. There's not a big demand anymore for commercial properties, and the owners had a difficult time in basically finding tenants for that use. That area used to be a barber shop, I believe, and I think after COVID, where everybody's working from home now, you know, the demand for commercial property and offices is just not there. So I'll go ahead and
Before we get started, we do have some questions.
I just, because I'm just point of reference, the first building, that's the flower shop, right?
yeah, the flower shop is next door to it.
Okay,
This is where the barber shop,
Okay.
where the Irish Insurance was.
okay,
in the front
all right.
building. And then this is the little we call it a carriage house, but a house, single family residence behind that.
Okay, I was just trying to get my
Yeah.
bearings of
Yep.
the house there. Okay,
Okay.
cool. Thank you.
And so,
So the current use of the front building was totally commercial.
No. The first floor was where the insurance was from 2000-ish up until 2016, I believe. And then a barber shop, Bob and Dee's Barber Shop, went into that insurance space on the first floor, the whole thing, for from 16 until, well, whatever, a year or so ago. And then the upstairs of that building is 2 apartments upstairs already, above the barber shop.
But that place isn't occupied right now. It's up on stilts. Last time I was over there.
Oh, no, it's all done and
that's
it's
free.
put back
Okay.
and done and everything. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so
What's the square footage of the 2 apartments that pre-existed?
The 2 apartments upstairs are still existing. They have been existing since 2000. They are 650-ish square feet upstairs. Each. Yep. Basically half of what the lower level, he has the square footage on it.
are these
He
are
does,
these
but it's
studio
around
apartments?
What's that?
Are they like studio or 1 bedroom or?
They're one is a 1-bedroom and one is a 2-bedroom. Yep. Because the stairway layout and things. So the 1-bedroom, long story short, has like a larger bathroom because they have a laundry inside. So that one has the laundry in the bathroom. The other one has the laundry in one of the, I call it is a bedroom, but it is very small. You know, it's a small bedroom. The person used it as an office, you know, little home office thing for the
Okay.
2-bedroom.
And so I assume you're looking to replicate that on the first floor?
Downstairs, because again, the stairway space and things like that, was going to be just 2 1-bedrooms.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And what is currently the back property?
That is a single family 2-bedroom home.
Okay, and that's looking to be split into 2 units?
Yeah, that one there is probably, is even foundation wise, is going to have to be done like I just did the front one
Okay.
because of the stone foundation and things. And was thinking of changing it to a 2-unit, but with 2 1-bedrooms.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right, that makes sense.
Basically same square footage, just dividing it. Because it's a 2-story home already. Yep.
Okay.
You just divide it.
All right. I guess we can go ahead and get started.
yeah, so this property is non-conforming, as is almost all of the other ones in that area. So I think the big thing to remember is Mr. Rivers not looking for any expansion. It's really just a change of use. The buildings are going to stay the same, with the exception of renovating, repairing. The foundation needs to be replaced. So, and investing in that, and then switching the usage to residential.
And all the parking on the left side would be for the units?
Yes.
And since you mentioned the parking, we do have in excess of the required parking about twice as much as what would be required for that residential usage.
Okay.
Well, that's most of my intro. So we'll go right into the variance requests. Number 1, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because granting the variance would allow for the productive use of the existing property. And the need for affordable housing has continued to grow, and utilizing this site for housing would be a benefit to the public. This development is located in the town center overlay district and will provide a mix of 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom apartments in an ideal location in the center of Merrimack. The nearby properties are also non-conforming lots with a mix of multifamily and commercial uses. This includes a crematorium to the north and flower shop to the south, along with non-conforming multifamily residential uses on lots 5D4, 75, and 76 to the northwest. The proposed improvements to the site will create a more consistent neighborhood visual appearance as the multifamily buildings to the northwest were also recently constructed. The design of the site will not create any health or safety problems and will provide additional housing for the community. The uses proposed are permitted in the underlying zoning and will be consistent with the surroundings. And since the proposal will provide the above while resulting in no negative impacts to the public, we believe granting this variance would not be contrary to the public interest.
So I guess my first question is, when we say that they're affordable, what is the rent for these units?
The one upstairs, the one bedroom is 1,000. 2 bedroom is vacant right now because of the construction and stuff. They moved out and they didn't come back. But probably would be a little over that. And same with the ones downstairs. Sorry. Oh, sorry. The 1 bedroom is 1,000. And the 2 bedroom, again, I haven't rented it yet, but probably a little more than that. And the 1 bedrooms downstairs, I would say would probably be in that same range, 1,000, 1,500, which is a lot. And the utilities are really low in these because it's all been redone. It's gas heat, efficient furnaces, the whole thing. So they are pretty inexpensive. I don't have the amenities like the others do, but some people are not looking for that. So I've had good tenants and, things like that. Obviously, I own the property next door. And so.
So where the zoning for residential is referred to as.
Is your microphone on?
So where the zoning for the residential is referred to as senior housing overlay, that's what's written in the code. Are you, and I would assume senior housing is 55 plus, are your tenants all fitting that profile or definition?
I do not have a stipulation for that. My tenants right now are over that. Even the ones in the back house are over that. And the lady that is living upstairs right now, she's 60-ish, something like that.
Okay.
So I don't have a stipulation for that. No. If they are over that,
Well,
that's fine with
My thinking is that in the spirit of the zoning ordinance, since it's residential under the caption of senior housing overlay, that the tenants should be 55 plus.
So just because the property is in the elderly housing overlay does not mean that he needs to utilize that. He's utilizing
Really?
the town center overlay. Overlay is an optional district.
Okay. All right, I withdraw my comment.
The buildings also are serviced by municipal water and sewer and gas. So.
All right.
All right.
Any other questions? Chuck?
Actually, it's not a question, it's a reflection. I think Mr. Ribbit has met the criteria necessary for an easement, but he has failed to mention that he's taken great pains to keep and maintain an historic building that was essential to the long-time viewscape character of our community. He didn't have to do that, but he has done that. He's taken an old building and kept its place in our history here in Merrimack. And I think that is a tremendous public value.
All right. Thank you.
Did you want to add to that? Well, you just told me.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah. It used to be an old general store, from what I understand, back in the day in 1900s. I think it was built in that area. So just kind of interesting. But
Nice.
Yeah.
And the spirit of the ordinance?
spirit of the ordinance is observed because this project is an allowed use in the district and is limited by the size of the lot. The site is already developed and provides many of the necessities for a multifamily residential use. There are adequate parking spaces already provided, utilities on site, drainage, traffic, and other improvements. The new use will not make the lot more non-conforming and will reduce impervious area by providing a landscaped area at the front of the site. We believe that the intent of this ordinance is to limit overdevelopment of parcels and create a harmonious neighborhood in the district. And since the proposed structures are already built, the site will not be overdeveloped, and the neighborhood's visual appearance will be improved. Since this proposal will provide the above and will result in no negative impacts to the public, we believe that granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance.
So my question is actually directed to Robert. Should this variance pass and they decide to remove the property and develop a new building, would they still be able to with 6 units if this variance were to pass?
Yes, because the variance runs with the land. So if that building were to be torn down, he'd have the permission to put 6 units on the property.
Okay, and there's no way to stipulate that in the motion?
I mean, not really. Doesn't you can't condition something on that he can't tear the building down.
Okay, just curious.
Now, point of information, we have in our zoning ordinances a minimum square footage requirement. So a single family or two family has a minimum of 600 square feet per living area, and I think from what you said, the rear building meets that.
The rear building?
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good
Well, yeah, it's 2-story.
Yeah.
It's 20, I think it's 20 by,
Well, my point is,
the back building definitely, because it's a
It
single
says-
family.
multifamily dwellings, which is greater than 2 units, you'd have a minimum living area of 600 square feet for single 1-story, or let me back up a minute. This is confusing. 1,040 for 2-story dwelling units. Are all your dwelling units in the front building going to be on one floor? So you have 4 units, so you have two
Two-
separate units on the first floor and two
And
separate on the second?
separate ones up above.
Okay,
The 2 separate ones are already existing.
okay, all right, that makes sense.
Yep, okay.
Okay. It was,
Yep.
what I think they're referring to here, which I kind of misunderstood when I first read it, was a 2-story would be like a townhouse. That's where they're referring
Right,
to it,
right,
saying it
right.
should be 1,000 square feet.
Right.
But your situation's different.
Yep.
So this
Yep.
doesn't apply.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. What is that?
Number 3, granting the variance would do substantial justice because granting the variance would allow for the productive use of an existing lot and provide needed housing in the center of town. In the current market, commercial spaces are difficult to rent as there is not a large demand. Our client would like to renovate the existing commercial use and create additional residential units. In addition, this project will improve the existing buildings on site, bring them up to code, and enhance the visual appearance of the neighborhood. The uses proposed are permitted in the underlying zoning and will be consistent with the surroundings. This project will provide quality housing for the community. This project will also increase the local tax base. Granting this variance would do substantial justice because it would allow for the productive use of the property as described above while providing responsible growth in the community. In other words, a denial of this variance would be an injustice to my client as there would be no apparent gain to the general public by denying this application.
All right. Any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
Number 4, granting the variance would not diminish the value of the surrounding properties. The existing site is in good condition with new pavement and parking. The project's conversion to a multifamily residential use will allow the buildings on site to be updated and increase the visual aesthetic value. The uses proposed are permitted in the underlying zoning and are consistent with the surroundings. It has also been our experience that new construction and development will actually increase the value of surrounding properties. As a result, we would expect this project to have positive impacts on the surrounding property values.
Any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
Number 5, unnecessary hardship. Owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, explain how no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. The subject parcel 5D-4-49 is a .439 acres or 19,140 square feet. It is located in the C2 commercial and I1 industrial districts, as well as the town center overlay district. The town center overlay district states that residential uses are allowed, and the density regulations of that section, 2.02.13, state that residential uses in the C2 and I1 districts must meet the yard and lot requirements of the corresponding residential districts. Since the site has public sewer and water, R4 zoning is applied. Those requirements state for each unit of the multifamily development must have 40,000 square feet of area. The subject parcel is unique in that it was created prior to the updated zoning ordinance. The existing commercial use section of the building will be difficult to rent in the current market. This lot is an ideal site for renovation and would suit a multifamily residential development. Based on the above, we do not believe that a fair substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. In section B, the proposed use is a reasonable one because we believe that the proposed use is reasonable, one, for all the reasons previously stated, and the following is an outline of why we believe proposed use is reasonable. Granting this variance would allow for the productive use of the existing property. The existing buildings and improvements already exist, so the site will easily handle the residential use. The project would have no measurable negative impacts on the surrounding or property values. The multifamily residential use would not be contrary to the public interest. This project will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. The proposed would, in our opinion, observe the spirit and intent of the ordinance, and the site plan demonstrates that there is an adequate space on the subject properties to support this redevelopment. And since this proposal will provide the above and will result in no negative impacts to the public, we believe that the proposed use is reasonable.
And actually, before we continue, is everyone on the board comfortable with accepting the first part as unnecessary hardship?
Yes.
Are you okay with that?
I've indicated as much.
Okay. So you're all set. You don't have to
Okay.
read the.
Thank you.
So it makes perfect sense what you're looking to do, which is maintaining the property in a more useful manner. I guess at this point we'll just go ahead and open to the public unless we have further commentary from the board.
No, Mark's been in front of us a couple times, and he's done a great job with the house to the south of the. Looks great when he finishes. So I'm sure this property will look top notch when it's done as well.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and open the public. Is there anyone here looking to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone here looking to speak against this petition? All right, I'll go ahead and close the public portion and entertain a motion.
Quick comment. Again, as Patrick has said, Mark's been here before with different petitions, and he's always lived up to what he has promised. So I'm very comfortable with this, and I believe he has met all the criteria. So that being said, I'd like to make a motion that the board find the petitioner's responses to the statutory criteria are sufficient, proved each criterion is met, and the board adopts the petitioner's responses as the board's findings of fact. And further, to grant the variance under section 2.02.13 F in the zoning ordinance to permit a density of 6 multifamily residential units in the town center overlay district on 19,140 square feet parcel, whereas one unit per 40,000 square feet is allowed.
Second.
I heard Chuck first. So motion made by Rodney, seconded by Chuck. All in favor? 5-0-0. So again, there's a 30-day window where somebody could appeal this, but otherwise, congratulations and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks.
talking to myself.
Oh. All right, the next petition is Governor's Hill Court, petitioner owner, variance under section 3.02.4 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing leach field to remain 10 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required. Parcels located at 22 Constant Street in the R1 Residential by Soils and Aquifer Conservation Districts, tax map 6D, lot 104, case ZBA 2023-01. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, members of the board. My name is Eli Lano. I'm an attorney with Bernstein Schur in Manchester. I'm also joined tonight by Dana Finn, who is a representative of the applicant, and also Steve Keach from Keach Nordstrom Engineering, who is the project engineer. I realize from reading the notes prepared by the town offices, and again, I appreciate the consideration put in on all of these. Realize it looks like we've provided an awful lot of paperwork in front of you, and certainly I will plant a tree when spring comes, so I apologize for that. The reason we did this way by providing the administrative appeal, a variance application, and alternatively an equitable waiver is that we're in a situation where time is of the essence, and that this property was supposed to close the week before Christmas. The buyer is a single mother with 2 kids and 2 dogs who are now living in a hotel because we built this to the approved DES site plan and put up the retaining wall after a good faith reading of the zoning ordinance and have not received a CO. So if we came for variance and are denied and then had to come another month later for an equitable waiver, you see that we leave this poor woman in a hotel. So that's the reason you have 6 applications in front of you, and my hope is that in whatever order the board sees fit to take these, I'm willing to present in that order. I think probably variance makes the most sense. We've just discussed septic. This is actually a similar reading based on a slightly different provision of your town ordinance, but I will not obviously force the members of this board, if I do receive relief here, to go through these other applications. I would ask that they be tabled until next month such that any applicable appeals periods could run and then they'll be withdrawn. And again, I don't want to count my chickens, but if you do see fit to grant any of these, I'm not going to make you go through a bunch of superfluous applications.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the detail, and I do understand this isn't the first time we've dealt with a scenario like this. What's that?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just talking about. I always feel like we should look at the appeals first because those are the hardest to really agree upon. But at the same time, understanding that the variance is really the one that we're after because it has the least impact. I would say let's definitely stick with the agenda on that and go with the variance first.
So which is your pleasure? Do you want to talk walls or do you want to continue with septic?
If we could
So
stick
we
with
have
the
2
order.
variances, 2 equitable waivers, and 2 appeals. So if the variance is passed, that's all we hear is basically how this plays out.
Right.
So yeah, I'd stick with the variance for the septic setback first, and then
Okay.
do the wall separately.
Then let's do it that way. Let's start with the septic setback.
Great. Again, it seems to be the pleasure of the board that I'll give you a brief introduction on this and then go through each of my five criteria as written here. But I do want to reference that this falls very similarly under the application for the first variance that you heard tonight, in that the applicant, Governor's Hill Corporation, filed with the state for the septic plan as built. And this was again after reviewing the town zoning ordinance. This is a pre-existing non-conforming lot under your ordinance, in that it was subdivided in 1966. The bulk of these lots were developed in the 70s, and it falls under the 3.06 setback requirements, or 3.05, and then 3.06 is septic. Again, we don't necessarily need to get into all of that for the variance application, but the point is we reviewed We saw that it references the DES regulations. We cited it in such a way that it's compliant with the DES regulation. We applied to DES, received preliminary approval, which was sent to the building department, apparently not reviewed as part of the course of those applications. And then on December 1st, received our I forget, it's the approval, but it's like the operational approval for the as-built approval. And so that was received on December 1st, and then also sent, CC'd to the town, and not reviewed until Mr. Price noted that it doesn't fall under the section 3.024 requirements. And I think there's probably a time, which I hope is not tonight, that we can sit down and discuss how that works. But without further ado, I think I should get to the 5 criteria on the septic system.
So just for clarification, this is a recently built property.
This is a new build construction, a rather challenging site in that Constance Street flows steeply downhill toward the elementary school, Reed's Ferry. So what we did was built the retaining wall that we'll talk about, but tried to create a level driveway, level house lot, and then it's the retaining wall and more backyard in the back. But there were some fairly significant site work concerns to get this into a shape where we didn't have a parking lot on driveway on one level, and then you would walk back out to the street or go into the house. It's you driveway to garage into the house, sort of standard.
Okay.
What you would expect. But again, it took a significant amount of site work. And then due to that retaining wall bifurcating the site, this was the spot that made sense and again complied with DES regulations for the septic setup.
So just so that we're, I guess, on the same page based on how we discussed the first petition, if for whatever reason the ask was to move the leach field to within the variance, if you were expected to follow the ordinance, I'm sorry, and the variance were to fail, would that mean the retaining wall would need to be moved as well?
I do, again, I'm not the project engineer, but my understanding of how everything is cited is that this is the most logical place. And if you moved it 10 more feet, which is Mr. Price's understanding of the ordinance, we'd be in the house, I think, for this, whereas now it's sort of in the side yard. So it wouldn't.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So you'd be.
But the other option, I think you could conceivably change. Again, I'm not a site work professional, nor an engineer, nor a septic installer, but you'd have to figure out a way to level the backyard as opposed to the retaining wall and find a place without going too close to that back setback that was suitable for this. So what we've done here is put it on a flat spot that's out of the way of the house, out of the way of the driveway. And again, a leach field is borderline invisible, but for the candy cane vent stack. So
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I probably should have been. My question was more if you needed to move the leach field.
it's going to be very expensive.
Well, yeah. But would it involve moving anything other than the leach field? Would you have to change any other aspects of the property to move the leach field?
Yeah, I think substantial site work would have to be undertaken.
You're on town water there,
It's town water, but all of that neighborhood is
so
on
it's no
septic.
wells to come into play.
No. Steve Keach Nordstrom. We serve as the project engineer for the petitioner on this. One of my employees devised the layout, and I think in your packet you may have a copy of a plot plan that was submitted. It's an as-built condition, the certified plot plan that from which Rob detected the problem that brings us before it. And you see that the leach field in question is situated at the north east corner of the lot, approximately 10 feet off the property line. Actually, the contractor put the field where it was designed to be. location of the house is such that in the code, we have foundation drains around the perimeter of it. So we have a minimum setback to the house so that leachate doesn't get into the foundation drain and exit. Sorry, I'm overcoming pneumonia, so my voice crackles and pops. Obviously, because of the reasons that Attorney Lino spoke of, there really isn't a lot of option here for siting this. If you were to go out to the site, you'll notice where the house is sited. It's on an elevated area, and hence the retaining walls that you'll hear about later this evening. Create a plateau. This lot, which was a lot of record, created in 1966 as part of the Level Acres subdivision, was very steep, and perhaps that's why it sat there for as many years as it has unbuilt. And the location of the system does in fact meet the DES criteria, and it was approved as such for both construction and subsequently for operation. I won't get into the piece because it's really irrelevant to the variance about the differences between 3.024 and 3.06. There's a bit of a disconnect between the interpretation today and what it has been in the past, when the town did at one time for many years review septic design plans before construction. With the bifurcation of buildings and planning, apparently that's disappeared. So those are the remarks I would like to add, and I'll stay in just in case you have questions. My friend Eli is an outstanding attorney, but as he indicated, he's not a site engineer.
So the long and the short of it is just, I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but long and the short of it is that there was no expectation that the town review the septic plan, and that's how this.
No, if you look at 306, it actually references Part ENV WS 1000 of the Code of Administrative Rules. That piece has always been applied. I say always. I have to admit, I personally haven't designed a septic system in over a decade, but I have people in my office that do it every day. And this system was designed by Gifford Coburn, who's been designing systems for 25 years. Historically, 306 has applied to either lots of records or for replacements. The way the codification of the zoning ordinance works, 302 is all the 1978 zoning that created the R1 through R4 and the R2, R1 through R3, slight, moderate, severe, and you know the rest of the story. And the piece with the 302.4, which requires the 20-foot setback, no argument on that, on a lot created after 1978. And so, you know, the route, hopefully the application that you won't have to hear is the other two, but that's what that's built around. I have been in business for almost 30 years, and in my files, I have probably over a dozen or more systems that were designed and cited precisely the way that this was in reliance on 306. I don't want to debate the point. Rob and his people do a great job. So hence the variance request.
Okay. I think I get where you were going with that, but understood. So in that case, we will, I guess, proceed with the variance.
Great. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because the purpose of the setback requirement is to prevent overdevelopment of lots to the detriment of neighboring lots and the neighborhood at large. The leach field, which has already been approved and installed pursuant to septic regulations, will present visually as a continuation of the side yard. Furthermore, the leach field location cannot be further built upon without significant risk to the functionality of the septic system. Granting the variance would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood nor harm the public health, safety, or welfare and is therefore not contrary to the public interest.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board? All right, continue.
2, the spirit of the ordinance is observed because the spirit of the ordinance is reflected in the zoning ordinance's effort to protect both the character of the neighborhood and the public interest. Taken in conjunction with the first criteria, the granting of this variance will not diminish the lot's essential use as a residential lot in a residential zone, and in fact enhances that use, nor will it harm the neighbors or the public. As such, the spirit of the ordinance is being observed.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
3, granting the variance would do substantial justice because substantial justice requires balancing the potential loss to the applicant against the gain to the public. If this variance is denied, the public will not reap any material benefit, and the applicant will be significantly disadvantaged by being forced to redesign and reinstall the septic system. The septic system is an essential component of this house and has been cited and approved under the septic regulations in its most logical location on the lot.
All right, any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
4, granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties because each of these lots is serviced by private septic systems with a leach field. The proposed leach field minimally encroaches into the side setbacks set forth in section 3.05 of the ordinance and should have no impact on property values as any encroachment will be underground.
All right, any questions from the board? All right, please continue to unnecessary hardship.
5A, this property is unique in that it required significant fill and the installation of a retaining wall to flatten and stabilize the building envelope. As reflected on the plan, the septic system location is as far removed as possible from the retaining walls and slopes because that's the most logical location on site. As noted, the purpose of setback requirements is to prevent overcrowding of buildings and structures, and that goal of the zoning ordinance will be upheld even if variance relief is granted.
All right, and B, sorry.
B is septic systems are allowed in this zone, and each of the neighboring lots is also served by septic. The Supreme Court in New Hampshire has held that an allowed use is inherently reasonable.
All right, thank you. Do we accept that as unnecessary hardship criteria? Or do we accept that for the criteria? Chuck?
I do not.
Okay.
I understand it's a very complicated issue, most of which has absolutely nothing to do with the town of Merrimack.
Okay.
But ultimately, we are being asked to give an easement for financial hardship. That's what the overall overarching question is. And I don't believe that meets the criteria for an easement.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully push back to some degree on that, Mr. Mauer, in that this is strictly dimensional.
My name is Mower.
Mower.
M-O-W-E-R, just like a lawnmower.
Very good. Thank you. And this is a dimensional variance question. There's not really a place to put this where the system works. So financially, yes, this lot was designed and there will be a significant cost incurred, but it really does meet that there's not another place on a significantly sloped lot where this can be put and be more in conformance with the town's ordinances.
Am I to take that as an unequivocal denial that there's a financial hardship?
I don't believe I unequivocally denied anything, and I
Well,
also
thank you
did
very much.
agree with you that there
Thank
is
you.
financial concerns at play.
Point of information, I visited the site today, and what he says is very accurate and precise. The site itself has, a small front yard and side yard. One side is the driveway and the garage, the other side is the leach field. Then, not very far from the back of the house, the drop off begins. It's a very steep one. So, I think what he's proposing is logical and reasonable.
Okay. So I'm just gonna throw out some hypothetical questions. I apologize. if you were to relocate that leach field to the lower part, I'm assuming that would cause problems, but I'm not sure what problems that would cause.
Probably the biggest difficulty from a construction standpoint to move it below the wall is accessing the area for construction and, more importantly, for future maintenance. By the creation of the plateau, on some of you may remember what these lots looked like before construction, and working with the petitioner, they went to great expense to bring in fill and construct the walls that are on the site to create a house that looked appealing, raise it up to make it street level, and to condense the improvements so that it looked reasonable and attractive. But there was great expense in doing that. We didn't create an area or seek to create an area that was larger than necessary to accomplish what we sought to do. And as a result, if to require excavation equipment, importing sand necessary, crushed stone necessary to build a septic system, it would be exceedingly difficult to create access for the initial construction. But I'm concerned that in the long run for the homeowner, all septic systems fail eventually. It might take decades, but they do. A member of the board said tonight, recollection of spending $15,000 a decade ago to replace a system. That's very real, and I think the cost here of moving the system below, not only in the initial instance, probably be easier now than 10 years or 25 years down the road. Also, by putting the system at that elevated area in the controlled fill, it's built on fill, and it was built on select fill. So the reality is with the septic sand that is to the north side of that house, people take care of that system. It will last a very, very long time. So I think it's not just the initial costs that have to be considered here, Mr. Chairman. I think it also is the long-term costs and benefit to the homeowner. Moreover, a very wise man once told me the best way to make sure that you never have to replace a septic system is to plant briars on it so nobody goes looking if there's a failure. If there's ever a problem with the system in somebody's front yard, they're going to know about it. If it's down behind a retaining wall, between the retaining wall and Reeds Ferry School, that could be there for a very long time and never be discovered. So I think there's a public.
Oh, I'm in total agreement with you.
Yeah.
My
So
question.
I don't know if I overkilled the question.
So
I failed to answer it altogether.
We're both very talented at doing that.
Oh no, I was purely playing devil's advocate with this. My assumption is, and I don't know if this is correct, if you were forced to relocate this thing below the retaining wall, then when it went to be replaced, somebody would have to excavate the retaining wall to get to it.
I think you'd have to excavate the retaining wall to build it there in the first instance and put it back. And I think you'd be doing the same thing at some point in the future.
Okay. So from a financial perspective, this is the most reasonable place to place the
I
septic.
think it's the most practical because remember, it needs maintenance.
Right.
And I'd be very concerned that if it was below, if there was a problem, it wouldn't be detected and the cost would be so exorbitant that the people would brush it under the rug for as long as they could. You'd still have the gravity carrying the flow from the house. There's a fairly appreciable grade drop from the house down to this lower area as you approach the back line of the school property. It does flatten out quite nicely when you get down there.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that. Any further questions from the board before I go ahead and open this to the public? All right. Is there anyone here that's looking to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone that's looking to speak against this petition? All right, I will go ahead and close the public portion of this. Do I hear a motion?
I think before I make the motion, I think there's a bigger issue here with the septic. So we phase 2 of these, and we'll discuss it after you guys are. There's no reason to keep everybody here, but it certainly is something that we do, and it's been brought up by multiple members. It's something that needs to be brought up to community development, because we're going to see more of these if not. But we'll table that discussion till after. I don't want to keep the people here any longer than they already have. So I make a motion that the board finds the petitioner's responses to the statutory criteria are sufficient, provided each criterion is met, and the board adopts the petitioner's responses as the board's findings of fact, and further to grant the variance under section 3.02.4 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing leach field to remain 10 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required.
Second.
I also would like to throw in there, as far as discussion on this, Merrimack, and we've come through across this a lot, non-conforming lots all over the place. So I'm not really surprised that something like this would come up for a non-conforming lot, but that's my take on it.
Not just that, but a lot of these properties that were non-conforming before that were hard to build on are starting to be built on now. So we're going to see more and more things like this.
I would agree.
You will.
Yeah,
I
I agree.
And it was a 1968 subdivision.
6.
6.
Yeah, 66.
And these zoning ordinances were written in like the 80s, 90s. So
Yep. All right. So motion made by Patrick, seconded by Ben. All in favor? All opposed? All right. 410. Chuck in the opposition. All right. So, and as we discussed earlier, there's that 30-day window. So the rest of these will be, or the subsequent equitable waiver and the appeal, I assume, are to be tabled that apply to this.
I suppose from a practical standpoint, it would make sense to get through the next one, and then I'll ask for continuances as is necessary.
Okay.
Because you probably want to open these to then continue them, but
That makes sense.
we would have to do that.
right. And again, sorry for applying 6 times, but
No, it's okay. My inability to manage my paperwork in front of me is the problem.
I had to get out a red Sharpie to make sure I could grab the right thing at the right time.
I had to get out my glasses. Make sure I was reading it right.
All right. So the next petition is Governor's Hill Court, petitioner owner variance under section 3.06 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing rock retaining wall to remain 1.6 feet at its closest point from the side property line, whereas 15 feet is required. Parcels located at 22 Constant Street in the R1 Residential by Soils and Aquifer Conservation Districts. Tax map 6D lot 104, case ZBA 2023-02. And I think we've had plenty of discussion about the retaining wall. So it's up to you. You can give us some more insight, or if you want, you can jump right into the.
I think one thing that in my review of this comes to me repeatedly as something worth noting is that if these were 100-foot setbacks and we had the retaining wall starting 3 feet from the side setback and it should be 100 feet back, that makes a visual difference. Whereas it sounds like each of you has visited this site. If you were to move this wall to make it conforming, visually, I don't think anyone would notice for most of it. Because just again, with a 15-foot setback, moving it from here to there is not overwhelming in terms of visual relation. And I think that has a bearing on our request for relief being reasonable. Again, based on our review of the zoning ordinance and having, again, we don't need to get into the subsequent applications until it's time to do so. But I think Mr. Price and I have a good faith disagreement of structure versus building. There's the definitions in the ordinance could probably be written so that they're mirrors of each other, that where one says structure, one says building. But anyway.
So I guess that brings up the next question is I think I have a understanding as to what happened with the septic, since we've now seen 2 petitions tonight that were very similar in that regard. How did this, however, not get noticed during the building process?
Sure. So again, not to get into the equitable waiver or the administrative appeal, but there are, and again, not to be too much of a lawyer about all of this, but I can't help myself. There's canons of construction for how you review ordinances and laws all the way down to these zoning ordinances. And one of them is that if there is a more strict provision, so if something is about everything and something is about something specific, the specific one takes over the broader one. So in your zoning definitions in the ordinance, there's yard and there is side yard. And they read this slightly differently, that one of them has structure, can't be primary structure needs, and again, it probably doesn't do me a service to paraphrase here, but they're all available and in the applications as well. But you could build a building had to be outside of it, but an accessory structure, which this would be, just by many definitions, can be within. So we looked at it and said, where's the most logical place to build this that's compliant? It's here, and that by this reading of this is compliant. And obviously we're here asking for a variance arguendo, saying that our reading of this was incorrect, which I'm not positive it was, but for the sake of the variance, it would be to say that we were incorrect and we are in the setback for this piece.
So you're saying the wall's on the side of the house?
It's
Sorry,
on,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah, so Constant Street, if Constant Street's,
I'm looking at that right there.
that's the side.
So the wall's basically on the side of the
You're
house.
you're standing on Constant Street in that
Okay.
picture.
All right. That's what I thought when I saw it.
Yeah.
But so it's on the side. So the zoning ordinance talks about the wall being not on the side of the house, right? Is that what the
The distinction is that there's a definition for yard setback and side yard setback. And side yard setback references buildings, which I would say this isn't.
Right.
And yard setback mentions structure. If this said structure, it absolutely would be a structure in the side setback.
But we don't have a definition of the term structure in the zoning ordinance.
It's actually, staff disagrees. There is a definition of the word structure in the zoning ordinance, and that is anything constructed or
That's right.
erected,
You're right.
the use of which demands its permanent location on the land, or anything attached to something permanently located on the land.
But the point here, and again, no disagreement with your reading of that, is that it says building. And again, we would read, again, provided that I think Webster's or Merriam's definition of it, that something in a fixed location, generally with a roof.
So where I'm confused, and probably it's neither here nor there, when I hear that interpretation, I'm thinking like gazebo. I'm not thinking a retaining wall. When I see retaining wall, I'm thinking like fence. And obviously this isn't my profession, so I don't really know what the difference between a retaining wall is from a fence, other than visually I know what they look like. I don't understand how they are different in terms of how zoning would treat them, because I mean,
So again, for the sake of this application, and I don't want to interrupt board members. For the sake of this variance application, I'm willing to put aside, again, for this application, any argument that we have not built something non-compliant in the setback. And now I'm asking for variance relief from that non-compliance with the setback.
And from our standpoint, we consider anything that would require a building permit to be a structure. And under the International Building Code, a retaining wall that is greater than 4 feet in height does require a building permit and engineering. Therefore, it is considered a structure.
so being a retaining wall doesn't make it a structure, its dimensions make it a
4
structure.
feet, over 4 feet in height makes it a structure.
Thank you. That now I think I get this, because I was a little confused.
How tall is the wall in total?
I think tallest definite piece is 14. I've got-
Over 10 feet at the corner, southwest corner, where the wall bends.
It looks like there's 17 feet at the highest measured point.
I think that's the horizontal distance.
I mean,
Rob had it in his
Yeah.
report.
I think I found an 18.3 foot height that happens to be located within the the setback.
Okay.
I'd like to hear the
At its highest
criteria,
point.
because if you didn't tell me, if we weren't sitting here talking about a wall, that looks like natural landscape to me. I mean, that could literally, I mean, that's not what, when I retaining wall, that's not what I say. I mean, that could be natural landscape as far as I'm concerned. I'm very interested to hear the 5 points.
I'll just outright say that I understand why we're doing this variance. I would be very frustrated as a homeowner if I had to build a retaining wall and needed a variance for it, though, because understanding what a retaining wall does, I would be pretty annoyed. So, probably not a smart thing to say as the chairman of the board, but by all means, let's.
It's your prerogative.
Yes.
This being a structure or a building or whatever we want to call it, would this be seen by the planning board or the building department?
Planning board, no, but staff's understanding is, based on the way the building code reads, that the wall being over 4 feet in height would require a building permit and therefore be reviewed by the building department. Staff's understanding in this case is, again, that did not occur.
So who would know to come to the planning board? The
There's no
contractor?
reason, no reason to come to the planning board for the retaining wall on a single family home lot. This would have been caught during the building permit review process.
And that was part of it, Ray, Rod, is that during the process, a building permit for the house and all the construction was obtained. And routine inspections required by the building department occurred favorably. And it wasn't until Rob, in his function as zoning administrator, picked up on it after our office prepared and submitted the certified plot plan at the end. Is that correct?
That is correct. As part of the issuance of certificate of occupancy process, a plot plan has to be provided to community development, which we review for zoning compliance.
So when the building department came and did their inspections, they saw the wall and said nothing?
I can't speak to that.
Dana?
And we did, Dana and I discussed this earlier, but obviously a well-seasoned crew building this who's done retaining walls. It was built fabric and then crushed stone followed by the boulder. So it's a correctly built engineered wall.
Right. I'm not talking about the quality of the wall. I'm curious how, if the building department knows a permit is required and they come and they're checking the electrical codes, they're checking the roof, they're checking the structures, and they see a retaining wall, how that,
I can't speak directly to this piece of construction, but oftentimes in the case of a single family home, when you apply for a building permit, the permit is issued, not a series of permits, but a single permit. So it could have been presumed that the wall construction was covered under the permit that was in fact issued for this construction.
okay, thank you.
Shall I proceed with the criteria?
Please.
1. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because the retaining wall was built with boulders from this lot and neighboring lots and is significantly screened by existing mature trees. Additionally, due to the natural contour of the lot with relation to Constant Street, the visual impact of the retaining wall is minimized. Granting the variance allows for a desirable flat home site and driveway and will not negatively impact the public health, safety, or welfare, nor alter the essential residential character of the neighborhood.
All right. Any questions from the board? Please continue.
The spirit of the ordinance is observed because the goal of the ordinance is to prevent overcrowding, and this natural stone retaining wall provides separation through both the retaining wall and the resulting elevation difference between this home and the property at 20 Constant Street. Granting this variance enhances the lot's essential use as a residential lot by stabilizing the severe natural slopes without negatively impacting the neighbors or the public. As such, the spirit of the ordinance is observed.
All right. Any questions from the board? All right. Please continue.
3. Granting the variance would do substantial justice because, in balancing the rights of the lot owner with the rights of the public, removal of the existing retaining wall and redevelopment of the site will be very expensive, and a better alternative location does not exist. Based on the topography of the site, a denial of this variance would not be outweighed by a gain to the public. Moving the retaining wall out of the 15-foot setback would require removal of the driveway and essentially create a multi-level house lot. Doing so would not materially benefit the neighbor or neighborhood, as a retaining wall would still be necessary and only marginally further setback from the lot line if it is to comply with the 15-foot setback.
All right, any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
4. Granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties because the unique natural contours of this site require fill and stabilization to provide a level building and yard areas. The new house will provide favorable comparable values and should help raise property values in the neighborhood. Additionally, retaining walls of various construction, including poured concrete, pressure-treated wood, fieldstone, etc., are common on Constant Street, so this retaining wall will not be out of place in the area.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board? All right, please continue.
5A. While many lots on Constant Street feature slopes and retaining walls, the severe elevation change present on this lot, in conjunction with the developer's effort to provide access and a yard on the same level as the house, required more site work and fill than nearly any lot on Constant Street. Furthermore, the pre-existing lot configuration and dimensions greatly minimized the options available for overcoming the severe elevation change. Given the difficulties presented by the lot, the purpose of the ordinance will be upheld.
All right, and B.
Reasonable use because installing the accessory structure retaining wall directly corresponds to use of the lot for a single family residence in allowed and customary use in the zone.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Now, before I open this to the public, do we have any questions or comments for the petitioners? All right, Chuck?
I fail to believe that the configuration of the lot and the situation before us evolved in a way that was unregulated and is the only outcome possible. When you design a home on a lot, you certainly intend to meet all of the requirements, and they are significant and many. And yet the representation to us is that this problem as it exists could not have been any other outcome. That we somehow, as a community, bear responsibility for relief. And it does once again come to hardship. That this situation, which is bad, that this and this alone is the only configuration and alteration that could possibly be undertaken. Apparently without further tremendous financial risk on the part of the developers, homeowners, etc. I just don't believe that that is our responsibility to ameliorate with an easement.
Oh, and the petitioners did state that this is not the only configuration, it's just the most practical one. And based on what I've seen, that makes sense to me.
Well, I'm glad it makes sense to you, because I'm here to testify that it doesn't make sense to me.
Understood. All right, I'll go ahead and open the public. Is there anyone looking to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone looking to speak against this petition?
Do you want us to go sit down or?
Hi,
Good
Timothy
evening.
Dutton. I'm speaking for the owner of 20 Constant Street, Mrs. Hall.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a lot of concerns about the where the rock wall is.
being 1.6 feet from her property line. And it's a steep slope right there. We have the issue with potential road runoff. With the new driveway in place, and it's gonna impact her land. Over the summer, we did walk over there, and there was some debris, dirt, whatnot, that had come from the construction. And when she spoke to the town, she was told it was not the town's concern, that there was debris flowing onto the property. When I was there recently, from the top of the road down to approximately 184 feet, there is no erosion fencing. The fencing starts at the edge of the rock wall and goes around the back where there is some wet soils. So again, our concern is, over time, the water's gonna flow onto her property and cause problems. And we're looking for something to solve that problem.
Okay, so I guess my first question is, you mentioned debris. Could you define debris? Is there trash being left on the property?
No, it was soil, dirt that had flown across by that piece of property. So all the way down to the edge of the rock wall, it's only about 10 feet off the property line. And in that stretch was from construction of the rock wall probably, and some other things going on, that there was some soil debris on her property. And we're thinking over time, where the driveway meets that 1.6 feet, there's room there that it could flow down into her property and cause problems.
Okay. I understand the concern about water and the flow, but I guess my question is, how much debris are we talking was landing?
Unfortunately, I didn't take any pictures. Now there's snow there, so I can't really say. But again, the concern is over time, next 5, 10, 15 years, slowly it's gonna creep over there.
Okay, so your questions are specific to runoff and the runoff impact from this
Correct.
rock wall?
Correct, yes. And we're looking for something there to be put in place to prevent that.
I'm sorry, Rodney.
Quick question, Tim.
Yep.
How recently was that runoff? Was that during construction, or is that since the retaining
think
wall and
it's-
the driveway has been done?
I think it's been during construction. When I got there, by the time I got there again, there was snow over it, so I really haven't seen much there. And we haven't had like a spring rain runoff yet.
Okay.
And that there's a lot of water coming down that hill.
Okay. Yeah, that is a steep hill. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add some information, Public Works was out in the beginning of the start of, I think, fill being placed on the lot. And this is well before construction happened that I'm aware of. I don't know about anything afterwards. I can just speak to what I know. And during that point, I believe there was, I don't know if significance the right word, but there was at least a good amount of some erosion that took place and brought debris down to the silt fencing and down toward the property line in that area. So that may be what the initial concern is. There may have been more that happened later. I'm just not privy to that, but I know at least at the beginning of one instance where that did occur.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no, from the top of the driveway down, I want to say 180 feet, there is no silt fence. The silt fence starts at the corner of the lot and goes around.
Okay. But your primary concern is ultimately with the runoff and how drainage will be handled.
Correct.
Okay. So I can certainly relay that to the petitioner and see what their thoughts are. Our decision is more based on I would say the configuration of the property and how the retaining wall is currently set up. I obviously can't speak for the petitioners.
Right, well, and again, we want to know how the wall was built 1.6 feet from the property line. That's our biggest question, is why it was built.
And that's a good question.
We couldn't get an answer from the town, why it was built 1.6 feet. That's the biggest concern, and that's where we're concerned about the runoff, potential runoff.
Okay. So if runoff was not an issue, you still have concerns about the fact that it's 1.6
Yeah,
feet?
that's still a concern. We would like to have someone answer that.
Okay.
Because that's not, someone wasn't looking at the plan. They just built it.
Correct. Or misinterpreting the way the ordinances are laid out, which
Right.
ultimately
It could be the one.
yeah. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and bring the petitioners back up, and I will pose those questions to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dutton asked two questions.
Well, I'll ask again after.
Mr.
Sorry.
Dutton asked two questions.
Yes.
The second one, I don't have a response to. Perhaps Attorney Lino does. The first one, I can respond to.
Okay.
During construction, not just on this lot, but in other lots within Level Acres and on Constant Streets, for a variety of reasons, the petitioner and his construction crews did have some difficulties with erosion control. As many of you know, as Rob certainly knows, part of compliance with MS4 is that anytime you disturb area of land the size of what we're doing the subdivision was disturbed, you have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or SWIP, and SWIP inspections that are done. Those were being done in-house by a member of the development team. And when they had difficulty, reported to my office by a former town engineer, Don Domelo, Jeff Quirk from my office went out and gave some guidance and helped them until the lots became stable. In this particular case, I don't doubt Tim's words from when I know Tim forever. And if he's telling me erosion got over there, it got over there. All right, you can take that to the bank. But the area with the construction of the wall is now what I would consider, as a licensed professional engineer, stable condition. Perhaps before the wall was constructed, there was difficulty. I suspect that was true. But the wall construction is very stable. I first became aware of this issue that brings us here tonight in, I don't know, mid-December, when Rob called me, as he likes to do from time to time with such matters. I went out and took a look at it. As far as the drainage piece, directly in front of this house is about the high point in Constant Street, maybe just a little bit further to the north. And water does flow from the street onto the lot, which now has a paved driveway that it probably did not have at one point in time. But as we look at this plot plan, basically the land slopes generally in this direction. Tim's friend acquaintance lives here. Attorney Lino mentioned in his discussion on the wall itself the effort went into building it. One of those, couple of his remarks centered on the installation of fabric and a tremendous amount of crushed stone behind the wall. we have them do that to alleviate any possibility of hydrostatic pressure pushing, wall against the wall and freeze thaw, or just good old fashioned hydrostatic pressure. But what that does is for any water that leaves Constant Street and flows onto this property and is captured by the wall, behind the wall, it creates a convenient sink for it. It's like having, I want to use the term leach field because we've talked about that enough tonight, but on a bigger scale where the water can dissipate into the porosity of the crushed stone. I think any difficulty that, is it Mrs. Paul, Tim, to the, you're representing?
Yes.
Yeah, may have had with respect to runoff from Constant Street that comes to her property via this property. I suspect the construction of the wall itself will likely take care of that, given the way that the lot is graded and configured.
So by nature of the way the wall was designed, it's going to naturally mitigate some of that runoff?
Yeah, because there's an envelope of stone that extends from the back of the wall 3 to 4 feet inward. That is crushed stone envelope that goes from 6 inches to a foot below grade, present grade, to the base of the wall. It's basically a vertical envelope of stones. It sounds like pretty much all of you had a chance to view the site. You saw the size of the rock that was used to build that. Those rock at the high part in this area here, the base rock are the largest ones that were used, and they're bigger than some of these tables that we're sitting at tonight. In that area there where the wall reaches its maximum height, they're nested. So there's not just the one rock that might be sticking out at the bottom, but there's another behind it. And behind that is this envelope of crushed stone that creates drainage for the wall, alleviates hydrostatic pressure. That's the purpose there, but the secondary or perhaps even tertiary purpose that it will serve is any water that is running in this direction from the paved surface of Constant Street, and that's got a pretty good crown in it, so it will have some, will be captured by the driveway and sink into that, dissipate into the crushed stone envelope behind the wall. I don't think that the neighbor will get any more or less water than she may have gotten before, to be perfectly honest with you. But I can.
So if she won't get any less, it's not actually going to alleviate runoff.
It may, but I don't want to say that because I don't know that to be true.
Okay.
I also think with regard to siltation, I think that a growing season on the lawn has to have some
I think
help
that
on the
came
other
and went.
piece.
I think that problem came and went with the stabilization of the site.
And we did, from my discussions with Mr. Finn, the representative for the applicant, was that these conversations happened in
Midsummer.
we went from drought to having all that rain in a row, and that was when this happened. And again, before, as Mr. Keach just said, before
There were
site stabilization.
difficulties, not just in this area of construction in the midsummer timeframe with erosion, but elsewhere within the project. And on Kathy Street in particular. That was, and you remember that, right? And so I wouldn't have probably known about that had not we got an SOS call from our client, the petitioner. Jeff Quirk from my office, who's a construction engineer, went out and met with Dawn. She was spot on, and then communicated an action plan to the workman who implemented it from that point forward. And I think the problem is dissipated. Good foot of snow covers up a lot. The anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for
You're
those
welcome.
answers. Do I have any more questions or comments regarding this petition?
Could I just show the area I'm concerned with on the map?
You can, but all conversation must be directed towards the board.
Come up here.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
Okay.
I can show you what. Yep, sorry. So it's, what is it? It's what's short here too. Right, so what
I'm concerned about is that where it's circled,
Mhm.
it's just that one little piece that's beyond the rock wall.
Thank you. To the lock corner.
Yeah.
So your concern is with
That one,
the piece between the property where from the edge of the property and where the rock wall begins?
correct. I've been going to that house for 30, I'm getting in trouble, but probably 37 years. Huh? Long time, yeah. And there's never been an issue of water going over that edge. Now I'm thinking with the driveway right there, it has that potential, I believe, to maybe divert something down that steep slope. That's my concern.
Okay.
If you've been to the site recently, you'll notice that come spring, the petitioner is going to have to go back and do some fine grading, do some loaming and seeding. Mr. Finn is a representative of the petitioner, employee of the petitioner. Can we see to it that that area is touched in the spring and graded so that Tim's friend, neighbor,
Mother-in-law.
mother-in-law? Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
you and I we'll take a walk out there come spring and then
Okay.
we'll point. Even get you a little vest.
So does the planning board have any need to visit any of this?
No,
Okay.
planning board has no jurisdiction here.
Okay, just curious. So
If Tim tells me there's a problem, there's probably a problem.
okay. All right. So
Okay.
I guess with that being said, is that
That's fine by me, yeah.
okay?
That's fine,
Excellent.
perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming down and pointing that out.
Don't
Oh.
forget your cooler.
Okay.
I'm sure you can get in touch with him, but
All right. So
Thank you again.
thank you.
Have a good night, Tim.
Any more questions or comments before I close the public session? All right, I will go ahead and close the public and entertain a motion.
Make a motion that the board finds the petitioner's responses to statutory criteria sufficient proved. Each criteria is met and the board adopts the petitioner's responses as the board's findings of fact, and further to grant the variance under section 3.06 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing rock retaining wall to remain 1.6 feet at its closest point from the side property line, whereas 15 feet is required.
All right, motion made by Patrick, seconded by Rodney. All in favor?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, Chuck.
Going to have discussion on the motion.
Okay.
I need to record that I believe it's an inappropriate adjudication at this venue, and I will be voting in opposition.
All right, thank you. So all in favor? All opposed? 4-1-0 with Chuck in opposition. And the next thing we need to do now for for housekeeping is to continue the subsequent four. I'll go ahead and can I do it in one motion?
Yeah, if you open all four, you can move to continue all four to the next meeting, but you'd have to open all four first.
Okay. So I will go ahead and open the following for Governor's Hill Court petitioner owner, the equitable waiver of dimensional requirements under section 3.05, the equitable of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing leach field to remain 13 feet from the side property line, whereas 20 feet is required. The equitable waiver of dimensional requirements under section 3.02 of the zoning ordinance to permit an existing rock retaining wall to remain 1.6 feet at its closest point from the side property line, whereas 15 feet is required. The appeal from an administrative decision issued on December 13th, 2022 that determined a newly installed leach field shall adhere to the town's 20-foot property line setback despite being installed on a legal non-conforming lot of record, and the appeal from an administrative decision issued on December 13th, 2022 that determined a rock retaining wall that is over 4 feet in height is considered a structure and is subject to setback requirements, all of which is located at 22 Constant Street in the R1 Residential by Soils and Aquifer Conservation District, Tax Map 6D, Lot 104, cases ZBA 2023-06, 05, 03, and 04.
I move that we continue for 30 days to the next meeting, all four motions.
All right, motion made by Patrick, seconded by, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that'd be February 22nd at 6:30 in the Matthew Thornton room with no further notice to abutters, I believe is what I heard.
That's exactly what I said.
And for the board votes, if I may just take one more minute of your time on this.
Sure.
Again, thank you for granting the relief on the variance, and again, pleased, frankly, to be able to continue each of these until applicable appeals periods have run. But I do think that as you discuss the interplay of this septic regulation and these pre-existing lots, I think that Mr. Price does a very nice job with this and does a thorough review. I like to believe that I also did a good job in thorough review and reviewing the ordinance, and that we've come to different conclusions here, which leads me to believe there may be a situation where you have an ability to amend these to be more clear, because as these lots get scarcer and more difficult to develop, it ends up being more expensive for the applicants, and then the lots sell for more conceivably. And if these discrepancies can't be reviewed through variances and a conclusion reached, it's going to end up costing the town significant money in litigation down the road, just because there are these latent ambiguities that, as we discuss them, become patent ambiguities. So I do think that this board has the right idea to discuss how this might be able to be solved, because you want to provide clear statutory guidance for applicants moving forward, and to save the town the inconvenience of granting what some members feel is not the correct relief. So,
Thank you.
and I will let you go home.
I wholeheartedly agree with you.
What could
Thank
be
you.
what could be better than free legal advice?
It has been said, though, that you get what you pay for. So,
You're not supposed to say that.
well, thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the continuance? All opposed? All abstain?
I'm voting present.
So you're voting in favor?
I'm voting present.
Are you in favor? Or are you against the
I am
continuance?
voting present.
Yep. Agreed. 401 Chuck abstains. All right.
I did not file an abstention. I voted present. It should be recorded as such.
Take care. Have a good evening.
Motion to approve the minutes for
Well,
Wednesday,
before we do
December
that, we have discussion of other items.
Great. Let's do it.
I know. It's not like we have kids or anything.
Yeah, right.
So, discussion of other items. How do we? So, I'm a little bit confused by some of what has happened tonight, specifically around how do we manage the issue with some of these setbacks not being caught during the.
Building permit process.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, they're not under our department, so I have no jurisdiction to do anything there. I can only look at it from the zoning end at the end. It's going to take some sort of internal measure, discussion between departments. They're going to have to figure out ways to either review these things, or if they're not going to, then, as Mr. Lano said, probably amend the zoning ordinance so we don't have a septic setback that's not being reviewed. So we have-
What steps can we take to get the ball moving? I mean, so we're not put in this position, and we're not giving contractors and builders free rein to.
I would say, just having been chair, because I used to get asked this question all the time, is the next town council meeting in which you have to go in front and present town council, and they ask you what issues you're facing. Is you bring something like this up. And I know that that's not probably the answer we're looking for,
Especially
and it's,
considering
and
that's
it's,
a
and
year
it's,
from
and
now.
it's, yeah, it's not going to be for, it'll be for a long time before that happens. But that's one, I mean, when I was one of the times I sat in front of them as chair, I questioned about the ADUs, and that Merrimack didn't necessarily change the ADU. It was actually the state of New Hampshire that changed the ADU laws. But prior to that, we were every case 2 to 3 ADUs, if you remember, at a time. New Hampshire changed the law, not the town of Merrimack. But yeah, I mean that's one option, is because the town council asked, what are the issues, and I brought up issues with them in the past and concerns. But yeah, I really truly believe we're going to see more of these, and we're going to have to grant the relief, because the replacing a septic system to that wall, or do at any of those properties. I mean, where they put it was where you need to put it, and to tell a person, who puts their trust in a contractor, these people don't know. They don't know where the stuff goes. They take it for granted, whether they should or they shouldn't. And then to tell them you got to drop 25 grand to move a septic system.
I totally agree. I'm just
ridiculous.
trying to figure out a way to get the contractor / homeowner, whoever is in charge, let them be aware of this, rather than having everything done and then have Robert's group come in and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that.
Well, it sounds like it's got to come from building, right?
Right.
Yeah, from our standpoint, I think the easier thing would be to probably just amend the zoning ordinance and get rid of the septic setback. Because if there's no local review, then no one's catching it, and we're the bad guys at the end holding the bag on something that we had nothing to do with.
That actually was what I was gonna say. I if there is no way of enforcing it, why bother having it?
That could go for a lot. See, that's a slippery slope, though, because how many other things are we not enforcing, or is the town not enforcing that it should be enforcing? We let one go, and then what's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? I understand it could be a fast and easy way to do it, I guess, or certainly a way that wouldn't hold people liable. But I think that would become a slippery slope if there's other areas that we are not necessarily enforcing that haven't come up yet, or we don't know off the top of our head. And then, at that point, then why do we have ordinances at all?
Well, I mean, but that's just it. Some of the ordinances are enforceable. This seems like it's one that's not, because you can't enforce an ordinance in hindsight every time, or you're just creating unnecessary expense left and right. It seems almost offensive to have to do that to people.
Well, we have two choices. We either revise our requirements so that the septic setback is 10 feet, or we have the building department, in order to grant their building permit, to review the septic plan, review it against our statutory requirements, not the state's. We should proceed one of those two paths, so we put an end to all this craziness.
Well, that's one component. The other component, which was I think would have been a more dangerous road to go down, is if we went through the appeal process for the retaining wall, because I have a feeling like we would have spent a long time battling semantics if that was the case.
Yeah.
Well, the difference there is, which Robert and I discussed, and he suggested, is that they have an engineering study. If they're going to be building a wall greater than 4 feet, then there should be an engineering study and affirmative conclusion.
I actually have a question for Robert. Sorry.
Go ahead, I'm done.
Sorry. I apologize. The first case we heard, 19 Whitetail.
Yeah, whitetail. Yeah.
Whitetail. They said that their leach field was bordered their neighbors at 17. So how come the 17? How come they're not? They're. Do you see what I'm saying? Is if that bordered theirs, then the 17s is in violation as well.
Well, you don't know, because
Yes.
they're both together in between the two houses. You don't know what the setback was on the neighbors.
When they said, they didn't say, when they said next to each other, they didn't say what that distance of next to is.
Okay, all right.
It could have been 33 feet, so that guy was 20 feet and this guy was 13.
It's true. Okay,
Right.
yeah, all right.
As I recall, 17s was closer to the 20-foot mark. It did comply. It's just this one did not.
Oh, okay. It was just the way he said that throughout, and I was just like,
Yeah.
"Are you telling me you're right next to each other?" Because that's a problem. But again, I mean, and again, non-conforming lots, and we're gonna run into a lot of this, and we should be changing that.
So, if it pleases the board, I can go forward to the planning board with this information and say, look, the ZBA is requesting that this section be amended to either eliminate or reduce down to match the states or whatever the ultimate decision of
Well,
that
either
is.
I would say I would match the states. I wouldn't
Yeah,
eliminate.
so
it.
really, I guess the setback by default would be the state. So there's really no reason to have anything in our zoning ordinance then, because by default it would be the state rule
Yeah.
if we were to go that way.
I don't know what the reason was for the 20 feet. The various, yeah. And like I said, I had mentioned to you earlier and you were unsure. So
It's 15 feet. Well, it's 20.
Yeah,
20
towns
feet.
is 20.
Town's 20?
Town is
What's
20.
the state?
10.
10. Oh, I thought it was 15 and 10.
It's 20 and 10.
20. Okay.
I think it's short-sighted that we try to make a recommendation from the hip. Very serious problem that would enjoy.
Did you all hear what I had to say?
Yes.
That this situation would enjoy input from a good many people in the town of Merrimack's official capacities to plot out what all of the pitfalls may or may not be relative to a solution or an adjudication of the situation. So, no, I'm not happy with proposing that we simply go to the planning board and say, hey, let's change this.
Well,
How would you propose we solve the problem where it's not being enforced?
I would recommend that Bob have a conversation with Tim and that they seek the counsel of the town manager and the town council, as well as the planning board.
That's a perfectly reasonable alternative. We could do that.
I'm of the mindset that I'd rather see it enforced than done away with, but I'm also of the mindset that it makes no sense to sit through a number of these if there's going to be a sudden influx in new properties being built, because like we've seen before, that we have a lot of these subdivisions where not all the properties were built on because of one reason or another, and now people are starting to build on them, and lo and behold, they're going to need variances left and right to build these properties out. So we're gonna see stuff like this a lot, I think.
yeah, because the properties being built on land that was subdivided decades ago is going to have issues with our current zoning requirements.
Exactly. And a lot of these properties that exist within these subdivisions weren't built on for a reason. And now people want to build on them.
Well,
Makes sense.
I wouldn't limit it to the non-conforming lots. I would say as an overall.
No, I know.
As an overall application in the town, this is going to continue to be a problem as long as Philadelphia lawyers are speaking for their clients.
All right. So is there, I guess, what's a good next step?
Do you have a recommendation,
Yeah,
Robert, of
I
what?
th- yeah, I can go to Tim and we can try to address it internally to see if there is a mechanism for the building department to review septic plans. If there is not, then we would have no choice but to review an amendment to the zoning ordinance. But I don't know the answer to that at this time.
Okay.
Sounds good. Doesn't hurt to ask the question first.
I appreciate that.
Cool.
If
Alright.
there's going to be a deliberation like with town council, will we be notified?
Yeah, that would be well down the line. And it would go to planning board first. If
Okay.
there is any amendment, the planning board has the jurisdiction to amend the zoning ordinance first. They'd put a recommendation together to the town council for the town council to then vote on later.
All right. Motion on the minutes?
And.
Oops, sorry.
ultimately voted.
The way the charter's set up, it's actually town council has the authority to amend the zoning ordinance.
That's right, the one through chart, yeah.
Motion to approve minutes as written.
Motion made by Patrick, seconded by Rodney. All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Okay. 4-0-1. Chuck abstains. Weren't you at the last meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
5-0-0.
Not bad. Yeah, be careful, because like I said, it was getting icy when I came in.
The roads will be slippery.